Welcome to the channel, Stories of Suffrage. story to explain 1859. A black boy saved enslaved G to from death, a note followed was inexplicable, bizarre, and impossible. This is a difficult and intense story. So, take a moment, breathe, and listen carefully. Before we start, subscribe to the channel and comment which city and country you listen from. Your birth helps keep these stories remembered, rather than buried. Let's begin. On the night of September 14, 1859, in the swamps of Traboni Birch, Louisiana, a tube of member bird burned a woman life. She stood 8 feet tall. She would offer 3 bands, and she was earth exactly nesert the man on her. But the merzi sable strays, watching through the Spanish mouse, was a 17 شرطة لير شرطة old boy who was about to change Jeffries. His name was Isaac Mercer. I noted that night was so impossible, so unlikely, so completely against the free law of nature and that for over 100 years, historians refused to believe it happened at all. This is the true story of how a young man saved a giant, and how that giant, in her final days, taught him what it really meant to be free. Louisiana in 1859 was a different world. Not just different from today, but different from newer owners. The Mississippi River let spread across the land like the fingers of a giant hand, creating a mass of water was, so umbus, and fertile soil that builds more cotton than any other place in America. In that cynical year, Louisiana plantation shipped over $700,000 of cotton maize in Oakland and non-Oakland. Each bale had 400 bands. Each band required hand plant, tend, pick, and back. Those hands belonged to enslaved people. Over 300,000 of them lived and worked in Louisiana in 1859. They had no rights. They had no freedom. They had no future except what their owners decided for them. Under Louisiana law, they were not people at all. They were property, like houses or furniture, to be bought, sold, used, and sold. The Bellamy plantation sat 12 miles north of home in the heart of sugarcane country. It covered nearly 1,000 acres of rich black soil worked by 147 slave men, women, and children. The owner was a man named Cornelius Bellamy, a generous planter whose grandfather had come from Virginia in 1792 slave people and a dream of building an empire. That empire built over 800 hogsheads of sugar every year. Each hogshead held a sized band. At the 1859 price 6 cents per band, the Bellamy plantation generated nearly $5 an annual revenue. That was more money than most Americans would see in 10 lifetimes. Isaac Mercer was born on this plantation in the spring of 1842. His mother, a woman named Rose, worked in the manhouse as a cook and seamstress. His father was unknown, though suburbs in the slave quarter suggested he might have been one of the Bellamy sons who died of yellow fever in 1851. Isaac inherited his mother's short-mind and quit nature. He was so inherited some for more dangerous curiosity. From the time I could walk, Isaac was freeze. He was the overseer's can't believe. He was his bookkeeper McMorrison his edger. He watched the Bellamy children sit on the porch with their tutors, learn trade and write and cipher, and he memorized the freeze and so. By the dead of Asher, Isaac had taught himself to recognize letters. By 12, he could send out simple words. By 15, he was still of moments with discord newspapers and old almanacs, bezig to gather the mystery of the language on fragment at a time. This was a combinable by open, mutilation, or death. Louisiana nomad legal enslaved people trade. The punishment for a white birth teacher literacy was a fine of $500 and possible imprisonment. The punishment for enslaved birth learned trade was left to the owner's discretion, which of meant whatever cruelty the fertility inflicted. Isaac knows the risk. He kept his knowledge hid, if from his mother. He pretended to be slow and simple, the kind of young man that would be people overlook. He made himself invisible. An invisible people, he discovered, could go anywhere and see an ب17 Isaac had grown tall and strong with broad shoulders and hands calloused from labor. He worked in the field door half season and established the rest of the year. The overseers considered him reliable but unremarkable, which was exactly what he wanted them to think. Behind his quiet career, his mind was constantly working, absorbed information, planning for a future that seemed impossible, but that he refused to stop imagine. The woman are called the giant reef that is Bellamy Blantash in the summer of 1857. Isaac was 15 years old at the time. He was helping a loud blaze from a walk when he saw her for the first time, and the seat stopped him cold. She sat in the back of her open court, her leg folded beneath her because there was no room to tread the mat. If sitter, her head rose higher than the defies. Her skin was dark as reformed, and her eyes held a weariness that Isaac had never seen before, not even the oldest feed hands had worked their howless under the Louisiana sun. The defier was a man named Batters, a slave trader who operated out of New Orleans. He specialized in unusual merchandise. People came from across the south to be from Batters when they wanted something different: albinos, twins, people with extra fingers or mushrooms, and jeans. Batters نست Cornelis Bellamy that the woman measured 8 feet and 1 inch tall. He claimed she was the tallest woman in Americas, maybe the tallest in the world. Bellamy circled the wagon slowly, examined her as he would examine a horse or a piece of furniture. He complained that she looked half dead, and Batters admitted she was tired from the 3-week journey from Virginia but insisted she was stronger than any tomb. The negotiation took 20 minutes. This settled on $350 plus Barris's room and board for the night. The deal was sealed with a handshake. The woman was officially the property of the Bellamy Plantage. That night, Isaac's mother told him the woman's real story. The enslaved people had their own information networks, faster and more reliable than any newspaper. Within hours of the woman's arrival, rose no Afrisa. Her real name was Addis. She was not from Virginia. She was from a place called Boland on the coast of West Africa, not as necessary Nigeria. She was captured at the age of 12 during the era donor village and sold to Portuguese traders who shipped her across Atlantic in the belief a slave ship. Of the 400 people who began that journey, only 216 survived. Addis had come from her deadly. Her father had been a chief, her mother a priestess. In her village, tall stature was considered a seal of the FIFA. The tallest members of the community became warriors, leaders, intermediaries between the human world and the spiritual. Addis had been destined for greatness. Instead, she became property. For 20 years, she was passed from owner to owner. Some bought her as a curiosity to show off at parties and impress their neighbors. Some rented her at traveler shows and services where with people paid money to talk to her. Some tried to breed her, hoped to produce more genes they could sell at premium prices. None of her children have rated her hate. All of them were taken from her before they were old enough to remember her face. By the time she reached the Bellamy Plantage, Addis had stopped speaking. She had stopped hoping. She had stopped being a person in any way that mattered herself. She was simply worried that day. Cornelis Bellamy had plans for her. He saw proof to her results sobered. The fall social season was approaching, and planters from across Louisiana would gather for parties, balls, and business deals. A genuine African giantess would be the talk of Africa. Bellamy could charge admission to see her. He could rent her out for special events. He could make back his investment in team's offer. For the first few months, his plan worked. Addis became famous across Bonnie Beach. People traveled from as far as New Orleans to see the G2. Bellamy dressed her in fine clothes specially made by seamstresses Baton Rouge. He taught her to bow and curtsy and perform simple tricks. He made her lift heavy objects and carry men on her shoulders like Schiller. But femme has a short memory, and curiosity fades quickly. By the summer of 1858, the crowd had dwindled. By the fall, they saw become all together. Addis was no longer a novelty. She was destined to be of must feed. That winter, her health began to fail. She developed a cough that would not go away. Her joints swelled and ached. She could no longer lift the load she once carried. The British doctor examined her and delivered his verdict. Her vote was kefrat. People of unusual size of suffered this fat. Their bodies simply could not sustain themselves. He gave her a year, perhaps two if she rested, but rest was not something enslaved people were permitted. Bellamy brought her to work in the sugar mill, where her he led her to reach machinery that others could not. She worked 18 hours during grinder seas, feeder can into the crushers while the furnaces rode on the syrup boiled. The work broke her dough faster than the doctor had predicted. By the summer of 1959, Addis could barely walk. She spent most of her time in a small cabin at the edge of the slave quarters, too weak to work, but too fallible at simply let day. Bellamy discussed his options with his overseer, a man named Silas Crenshaw. The doctor bills were mounted. The special food she required was expensive. She was costing more than she was worth. The slush was simple, though it could not be spoken blade company. Louisiana law technically required owners belfid the secure for their slave people. But the law also locked the other wall when slave people had accepted. When they wandered into the soap and were never seen again, when they fell ill with fevers and died for a new one could send for a doctor. On the night of September 1959, Silas Crenshaw and four other melodies onto a court and drove her into the bayou. They told the new one host that they were taking her to see a healer in the next bush. But the court was loaded with lamboil and firewood, and the men carried torches instead of matters. Isaac saw them go. He was supposed to be sleeping in his mother's cab, but he had sneaked to retrieve a book he had near the smokehouse. He watched from the shadows as the court rode past, and he saw Addis face them only. She looked at him. Their eyes met for just a moment. And in that moment, something passed between them that Isaac would never be able to explain. He followed them. He did not decide to follow them. His seat simply began to move. He stayed in the shadows, using a free trick he had learned after 10 years of being invisible. He moved from tree to tree, from bush to bush, always turned and wind, always to the sail. The men were not being careful. They did not expect anyone to follow. They laughed and passed a bottle of whiskey as they drove deeper into the swamp. After about an hour, they stopped in a clearing near the water's edge. Isaac rubbed as close as he dared and hid behind a fallen cypress log. From there, he could see the freeze. The man pulled Addis so the curtain threw her on the ground. She did not resist. She did not create. She simply lay there in the mud, her enormous body curled like a shield, waiting for whatever came next. Crenshaw stood over her with a torch in his hand, an answer that Bellamy wanted it look like acid, but that at her nobody would find anything but bones. One of the other men, a young overseer named Defies, looked uneasy, questioned whether this was right since she had not done anything wrong. Crenshaw dismissed the concern, arguing that she was either food and taken her space without giving anything back. He claimed they were doing her a favor by putting her out of her misery. They built the fire odor on her body. They thought it was lamboil. The smell filled the clear, chop and chemical and wrong. Addis still did not move. Her eyes were open, staring at the sky through the canopy of leaf, and Isaac thought he saw her lips move, brave maybe, or so it could be. Crenshaw lifted his torch and asked if she had any last words. She did not answer. She did not even look at him. Crenshaw drew back his arm through the torch, and Isaac Mercer stepped out of the shadows. He did not know why he did it. He did not have a plan. He was 17 years old, strong but unarmed. He was facing 5 crewmen with torches and knives and cans. There was nothing logical about what he was doing, but he stepped forward and knew. The men spun around, reaching for their weapons. When they saw it was just a young slave from the plantation, they relaxed slightly. Crenshaw actually laughed, asking what Isaac was doing that he ran whether he was lost. Isaac's mind rest. He needed a lie. He needed a reason to be here that would not get him killed. He needed something that would make this man last him. He told them that the more Bellamy had sent him, that the master had changed his mind and wanted them to bring her back. Crenshaw says in the road was suspicious. Question why Bellamy would send a serf to deliver such a message instead of one of the staff. Isaac explained that everyone else was asleep and that Bellamy did not want to wake them because he wanted kept away. Death and one of the other men's changed glances. It was plausible. Bellamy was known for his strange and his obsessive secrecy. He had let one his business become public gossip. But Crenshaw was not convinced. He stepped closer to Isaac, holding the torch near the young man's face. He accused Isaac of lying, claiming he could see it in his eyes. Isaac did not flinch. He had learned long because that flinch only made sense. He insisted that Bellamy was water at his house and would be in grief they did not bring her back. Crenshaw studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled, and it was the worst smile Isaac had ever seen. He announced that he thought Isaac had followed them at her on his own, that nobody knew where he was, and that if they put him on that bale with the giants, nobody would ever know what happened either of them. He cabbed Isaac by the collar and dragged him toward the bale of wood where Adisla, an answer that they would get to for the brace of one. Isaac looked down at Adis. She was looking back at him now, her dark eyes filled with something he had not seen them before. Not how exactly, something deeper, something fiercer. She moved faster than anyone thought possible, faster than her black body should have fallen. An enormous hand shook at and grabbed Crenshaw's ankle. She yanked, and he went down hard, dropped Isaac and the torch. The torch landed as Emma danced better that. Adis put herself upon to her knees. In the moonlight, she looked like something out of a nightmare, 8 feet of shadow and large razor from the roof like a spirit of fungus. She told Isaac to run. Her face was deep as thunder, rough from years of sails. She commanded him to run and not look back. The men were scrambling for their weapons. Defies had a pistolet. Another man was reaching for a knife. There was no time for debate. Isaac grabbed Adis' hand and told her to come with him. She protested that she could not run, that she could barely walk, and urged him to save himself. Isaac refused. He told her to lean on him, that they would go together. But they had to go now. Later, Isaac could never explain what happened next. He pulled on her hand, and she rose. She leaned on his shoulder, and somehow he did not collapse under her weight. They moved into the darkness of the soap, leaving the clear behind, leaving the men and their torches and their mirror behind. It should not have been possible. Adis would offer 300 bands. Isaac was strong for his age, but not that strong. Yet something happened at that moment. Something that defied physics and logic and freezer that should have been true. Maybe it was adrenaline. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was something else entirely. Something that could not be measured or explained. All Isaac knows that they were moving through the sable trees, through the needy water, through the darkness and the danger. He could hear the men shatter behind them, spread at search. He could hear dogs barking somewhere in the distance, but he kept moving, one step at a time, with the weight of a giant on his shoulders. They traveled all night. Isaac knows they saw better than most. He had explored it in secret over the years, maybe this bass and water was in his mind. He knew where the ground was solid and where it would swallow you whole. He knew where the alligators nested and where the water moccasins hunted. He knew which direction led deeper into the wilderness and which led back the plantation. He chose deeper. Every step took them further from a freezer he had ever known. By dawn they had covered nearly 5 miles. It was not far enough to be safe, but it was far enough to rest. Isaac found a small island of highland surrounded by water on 3 sides. A massive fallout provided shelter from the sun. He helped Adis lower herself to the ground, and then he collapsed beside her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They simply breathed, recovered from the impossible need. Finally, Adis broke the silence. She he had done that. Isaac thought about the question. He had been asking himself this himself. He admitted that he did not know, that he had seen them take her away, seen her face, and could not just let it happen. She pointed out that he could have died, that he almost did die. Isaac replied that so did she. She looked at him with those initiatives and explained that she had been ready to die, that she had been ready for a long time, but he was young with his whole life ahead of him. She wanted to know why he would risk it for someone like her. Isaac did not have an answer. At least, not one he could put into words. He just knew that when he saw her laying there in the mud, waiting for the fear to take her, something inside him had refused to accept it. Something had said no. Not this. Not that. Not while I could still do something. He told her that his mother used to share stories about people who did impossible things, people who fought into the darkness when everyone escaped. He had always thought those were just stories. But that night, when he saw her, he wondered if the stories were true, if people really could do impossible things if they just tried hard enough. This was quiet for a long moment. Then, for the first 10 years, she laughed. It was a small sound, rusty from the seas, but it was real. She told him he was a stranger man. She revealed that she knew his name, that she knew everyone's name. She was listened, even people thought she was not there. She knew that he could read, that he snuck at night to practice, that he had books in the smokehouse. Isaac's blood went cold, but she assured him that his secret was safe with her. He had saved her life. That was not a death she would ever be able to repay. The first day they saw was the hardest. Isaac had no supplies, no tools, no plan. All I had was his roots and his knowledge of the land. He gathered what food he could find, berries, roots, a trail he caught near the water's edge. He built a small fire using a technique he had read about in a book, spinning a stick against dry wood until it smoldered. It took him over an hour, but eventually the flames caught. This was too weak to help with any of this. She drifted in a net of consciousness, her blazer shone unable. The escape had taken a freezer she had left. Isaac feared she might die before they could reach safety. But where was safety? They were deep in the Louisiana swamp, hundreds of miles from the nearest vista. If they could travel, the roads and rivers were washed by safe patrols. The fugitives left of 1855 من that if reached the north was no guarantee of freedom. Skeptics left people could be captured and returned from anywhere in the country. Isaac had heard whispers about something called the Underground. It was not a railroad, but a network of secret routes and surfaces that helped enslaved people escape freedom. The network stretched from the deep south all the way to Canada, where slavery was illegal and escaped people could not be returned. But the Underground Railroad was just a rumor to most enslaved people in Louisiana. The deep south was far from the Northern routes. The coast of houses were hundreds of miles down Missouri or Kentucky. Carters would require crossing of the entire state of Louisiana, the Mississippi, the Tennessee. It would take weeks, maybe months, and there would be hinted free sub of the war. On the second day, Addis was strong enough to talk. She told Isaac her story, the real story, the one she had never told anyone in America. She was born in 1825 بوسط a village called Nkoron the Horn of Kbolan. Her father was a rabbi, a chief who led a community of over 3,000 people. Her mother was a priestess who communed with the spirits of their ancestors. Addis was their only daughter, born during Niclebeth, which her people considered a sin of their destiny. From birth, she was more different. She grew faster than other children. Surpassed her years before she could walk. By her 10th birthday, she was taller than any at the village. The elders said she was blessed by the God, chose to be a warrior and protector of her people. Then this refers came. They attacked at any during a festival when the village's defenses were down. They came with guns and chains and a hanker for Yom Korko. Addis' father did train to protect his people. Her mother was killed when she refused to be separated from her daughter. Adesser self was beaten conscious and open challenge, surrounded by strangers beer march to the cause. The march took 3 weeks. Many people did the long away from exhaustion, disease, or despair. Those who could not keep up were left behind the day or shoot were the fall. Adesser fifth because of her disaster enough, but she lost some around that march that she would never get back. She lost her face in the world. This last ship was worse. Adesser spent 2 months in the belly of that vessel, chant strangers and SBS so small she could not stand up straight. This smell was beyond description. The sounds were beyond imagination. People did every day, their bodies thrown overboard to feed the shores that followed the ship. Adesser fifth became somewhere else in her mind, retreated a place where none of this was real. When she finally reached Marek, she was so that the auction shores, says Caroline. The bears examined her like livestock, checked her teeth and muscles, assessed her breeder potential. She was 12 years old. For the next 20 years, she was passed from honor to honor. Some were cruel, some were kind in their own method. All of them saw her as property, as a sin to be used for their benefit. She learned to speak English, though she refused to forget her native tongue. She learned to work, though she never stopped dreaming of home. She learned to survive, though both of her did a little more with each passing year. She had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. All 3 were taken from her before they reached their birthday. Sold to their plantations, sent places she would never know. She tried to find them, tried to tell what happened to them. But this last system was designed to arrest those connections. Her children were scattered across the south like seeds in the wind, and she would never see any of them again. By the time she reached the Bellamy plantation, Adis had given up hope. She was watered today. She exploded today. And then a young man appeared in the dock and told her to run. Isaac listened to her story without interrupting. When she finished, he found himself weeping. He had heard stories of the Middle Passage before, settled in the slave quarters at Athene. But he heard it from someone who had lived it, someone who was sitting right beside him, meditating a way that Nazareth could. He told her he was sorry. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was all he had. Adis touched his face with her enormous hand, gentle as a mother's touch. She told him he had nothing to be sorry for, that he did not do this to her. He was trained and do it. That made him different from almost every other person she had met in this country. Isaac asked how they were going to do, how they were going to get to freedom. Adis smiled, and for a moment she looked almost Enrica. She pointed out that he was asking her, the one who was ready to die, while he was the one who would not let her. He must have a plan. Isaac did not have a plan, but he had something better. He had books. Over the years, he had read everything he could get his hands on, newspapers, almanacs, novels, histories. He had read about the geography of the United States. He had read about the rivers and roads and cities. He had read about the Underground Railroad and the brave people who operated it. And he had read about some that most enslaved people never learned, the specific route that escaped people used to reach freedom. There was a bus. It was dangerous and no one answer, but it existed. Isaac explained his plan. They would go north, follow the rivers when they could, travel beneath, head door the day. There were people on the road who would help them, both black and white. They had safe houses, places where no one could rest and catch a blaze. If they could reach Kentucky, they could cross into Ohio, and from Ohio they could get Canada. Adis looked at him with wonder, asking if he had learned all this from books. Isaac confirmed it, explaining that he had also learned from the sun. The enslaved people talk about this in a zone they thought nobody was paying attention. He was always paying attention. She asked how far it was and how long it would take. Isaac had calculated this and has had many times, though he never imagined how would actually make the journey. It was about 1,200 miles to the Ohio River. Roughly at night, header door of the day, maybe 15 miles per day if they were lucky. That was nearly 50 days, almost 2 months. Addis pointed that she could not walk 15 miles in a day, that she could barely walk at all. Isaac replied that they would go slower, that they would rest when she needed rest, that they would take as long as they needed take. She warned him that the man would come after them, that they would bring dogs and cans and more. They would not stop until they found them. Isaac acknowledged this but pointed out that they had a head start, and they had some the hunters did not have. When she asked what that was, Isaac explained that they had necessary clothes. The hunters had dentations and many an habitation to protect. They could not spend for a fortress or to slaves into the wilderness. Eventually, they would give up. But Isaac and Addis would never give up, because give up meant death. Addis studied this young man, this impossible young man who had built in her darkest moment and brought her back from the edge. She had lived 52 years, traveled halfway around the world, survived horrors that most people could not imagine, and here was a 17-year-old teaching her about hope. She asked if he really believed they could do it. Isaac thought about the question. Did he believe it? The logical part of his mind said no. The odds were impossibly long. They had no supplies, no weapons, no money. They were being hunted by men who know the land better than they did. Addis could barely walk. A freeze rose against them. But there was another part of his mind, a deeper part that refused to accept those odds. That part remembered the stories his mother had told him. It remembered the moment in the clear when he had stood up to face faithful man. It remembered the impossible night walk through the swamp, carrying a warm wild twist what he did. He told her that he believed they had a tray, and he believed that sometimes, when you tried hard enough, impossible things became possible. That afternoon, they heard the dogs. The sound came from the south, still distant, but getting closer. The being of hands on a silent, the most terrifying sound in the world, a Renault slave. Barthélemy had sent hunters after them. Isaac helped Addis to her feet. She was stronger than she had been the day before, but still far from healthy. Every step was an effort. Every breath was a struggle. They had no scent to the deepest part of the swamp. Isaac had read that dogs lost scents in water, so he led them through a free stream and bound they could find. The water was cold and full of had dangers, but it was better than being caught. They walked until dark, then kept walking. The dog fell behind, confused by the water. But Isaac knew they would not give up easily. Professional hunters are bad by the capture. They would follow the trail for days, weeks if necessary. The only way to escape was to get far enough ahead that the trail one could completely. Around midnight, they found shelter in an abandoned table's cap. It was falling apart, barely more than 4 hours than a roof, but it was dry and had from few. They collapsed inside, took those door neither but sleep. Isaac woke before dawn. Addis was still stable. Her massive body curled in the corner like 8 shells. Enslaved, she looked peaceful, almost happy. Isaac wondered what she was dreaming about. Her village, maybe, her family, the life she might have had as the slavers had never come. A corrupted state surfaces surrounded us. The swamp stretched in every direction, a maze of water and trees and danger. But to the north, I could see something that made his heart leap. A road. It was just a dirt track, barely wide enough for a walk. But it was a road. And roads led somewhere. Roads meant civilization, which meant danger, but also opportunity. People on roads might help them, or they might hurt them. It was a gamble either way. Isaac made a decision. They would follow the road north, but stay hidden in the trees alongside. They would watch for travelers and try to determine who was Randy and who was not. It was risky, but to run the swamp forever was not rubbish. They needed supplies, medicine, and information. They needed help. When Addis walked, he told her his plan. She listened to that comment, then nodded slowly. She told him that he was ways beyond his years, that in her country he would be destined for Kratzeners, a chief perhaps or a priest. Isaac replied that in this country he was just property. She corrected him, sana that in this country he was a miracle, and he should not forget that. They sat at the desk, following the tree line alongside the road. Brookgrass was a bit steady. Addis leaned on his shoulder, taking some afar out of her fellow legs. Isaac pointed at landmarks as they walked, teaching her to recognize the scenes of young habitats, smoke travels, cleared fields, the distant lawn of cattle. Near midnight, they saw lights ahead, a small settlement, maybe a dozen builders clustered around a crossroads. Isaac could make it a general store, a church, and what looked like a blacksmith shop. Dangerous territory for a nose, but we saw an opportunity. Isaac told Addis to wait while he got closer to see what their ordeal was. She grabbed his arm, but told that it was too dangerous, that if they caught him there would be no escape. Isaac assured her that they would not catch him. He was invisible. Nobody ever noticed him. Before she could work you, he slipped into the darkness. He moved through the trees like a ghost, silent and insane. Years of practice had made him expert at this kind of movement. He could get within feet if someone was at them knowing he was there. This had till him was quiet at his hour. Most of the builders were dark, their occupants asleep, but there was light coming from the church, and Isaac could hear voices inside. He crept closer, bracing himself against the wall beneath the open window. The man inside were discussing the search. They talked about $3 reward, the door leaf, that Bellamy was bought to grab himself. The man mentioned how it would be missing it for him and expressed surprise that she had help from the mercer boy, or the herd was smart for a nickel and hadn't trade summer. One man observed that a reader slave was worse than a Renoir, that it was a threat to the whole system. Another recreed, explained that Bellamy wanted them caught before it would spread. He asked the others to match what would happen if the other slave found that a young man and a cabin giant had escaped right under his nose. It would give them ideas. Isaac had heard enough. He carried back where Addis was at and told her what he had learned. $300 was an enormous sum. It would bring the free bounty hunter in Louisiana down on their heads. He told her they had to move faster, to get out of the state before the hunters could organize a proper search. She replied that she would try, but her body was full of her. Isaac thought for a moment. Then idea came to him. Crazy and desperate and probably impossible. But impossible was become their specialty. He explained that there was a blacksmith in that town and a general store. If he could get to know that being seen, he might be able to find some sort of help. A crutch maybe, or a coat they could steal. Addis protested that it was too risky, reminding him what the man had said about the search. Isaac pointed out that they were looking for a net for woman and a 16-year-old traveling together. They were not looking for a young man alone. He could be in an for a new one who he was there. Addis wanted to work you, but she knew he was right. She could barely walk. Without hubbub, without supplies, they would never make it to freedom. The only chance was to take risks. She told him to be careful, that he was the only hope she had left. Isaac slipped back toward the town. The streets were empty, the church met a party offer. He made his way to the general store first, finding a back window that had been a city open. He switched through, dropping silently into a storeroom filled with goods. He worked quickly, filling a burlap sack with what they needed most: dried meat, hardtack, a knife, a length of rope, a box of matches. He was so found a bottle of laudanum, a powerful painkiller that might help with Addis' joint. Every item was a risk, but every item might be the difference between life and death. On his way out, he spotted something that made him freeze. Hanging on the wall behind the counter was a wanted poster, freshly printed. It showed rough sketches of two faces, a gigantic woman and a young man. The reward was listed as $5, not $3. Someone had raised the stakes. Isaac tore the poster from the wall and stuffed it in his sack. Then he climbed back at the window and disappeared into the night. The next few days established a pattern that would defy their journey. They traveled at night, following the roads when they could, getting through wilderness when they had. Door of the day, they had a water for shelter they could find, Calf, abandoned builders, den sickest of bush. Isaac forage for food on their blazer now. Addis rested and kaferd, her strands so return. They loden halibut. Idel de constant ben her joites, bled her took further and faster, but Isaac crashed it carefully. Idikshit such madesses was calm, and he had seen what it could not be ball. He kef her just enough to finish, no more. They talked as they traveled. Isaac told Addis about his life on the Bellamy plantation, about his secret reading, about his dreams of freedom. Addis told him about Ikboland, about her family, about the traditions and beliefs of her people. She taught him morals in her native language, and he taught her about American geography and history. They were teacher and studied to each other, run van kroon was the free mail. On the fifth day, they reached the Mississippi River. It stretched before them like a rush, with brun and barf. The foreshore was barely visible through the morning mist. Somewhere on the other side was Mississippi, then Tennessee, then Kentucky, then Ohio. Somewhere on the other side was freedom. But first, they had to cross. Isaac had read about the Mississippi. He knew it was the most important waterway in America, carrying goods and people from the northern territories all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. He knew that steamboats travel abundant lands Danny. He knew that the river was used by slaves but also specifically lot for no train to cross. He also knew that there were ferries, small boats operated by people who would carry passengers across for a fee. Some of these ferry operators were known to Albrenos for the red brace. Others would tell them for their word. They spent 2 days camped near the river bank, hadn't a crop of cottonwood trees. Isaac watches the federal landers, studying the operators, their trade their characters from a distance. Most look like ordinary men, neither could nor rifle, just read make a laugh. But there was one who caught his attention. He was a black man, which was unusual. Most ferry operators were white. He was old, maybe 60, with canvas hair and a lamp in his walk. He wore simple clothes and spoke to everyone with the same quitters back, whether they were wealthy travelers or poor farmers. Isaac watched him for a full day before making his decision. Some said about the old man's trait. Some said in the way he moved, the way he treated people. It was a Campbell, but the reason they did was a Campbell. That night, Isaac rubbed out the ferry lander. The old man was settled on by a small fire, cook of some sort and a battered boat. Isaac stepped out of the shadows and cleared his throat. The old man looked up. His eyes were sharp, thicker in a freeze about Isaac in a single glance. He believed that Isaac was the boy they were looking for. Isaac thought about. He sorted the need, but the old man held up his hand. The old man told Isaac not let him, that he was too old for lace. He had seen the posters, read the descriptions. A reader slave, they said, smart as a hob, traveling with a geotomb. Not many people match those descriptions or under around Louisiana. Isaac prepared to run, but the old man calmed him, explaining that he had not said he was going to tell them. He invited Isaac to sit down and have some stew, observe that the young man looked like he had not eaten properly in days. Isaac hesitated. A fair instinct told him to flee, but some stress, some deeper, told him to stay. He sat down by the fire. The old man introduced himself as Abraham. He had been run as a ferry for 60 years. He explained that he was born free, that his parents were freed by their owners well before he was born. He had never been property, never owned humans, never felt job, but he had watched his people suffer for 60 years, and he had done what he could help. Isaac asked if he had Renault. Abraham laughed, saying he had been helping Renault since before Isaac's mother was born. He explained that was how he caught him. A slave catcher shot him back in 1899 when he was helping the family get across. They made it to Ohio. He met the doctor. He had been working funny ever since. Isaac felt how the surgeon his chest. He asked if Abraham could help them, if he could take them across. Abraham asked about the jet first, wanted to know if she was real. Isaac confirmed the freeze, at feet and 1 inch. Her name was Hades. She was from Africa. She was sick, but she was strong. She was the birth Isaac had affirmed. Abraham studied Isaac fast for a long moment, then stayed at home. He did a manual trade on a Louisiana bench. Isaac told him, not a phrase, but enough. About his mother. About his secret education. About the net in the soul when stood up self a stranger's life. Abraham listened to that interpreter, has all this crown better with the free world. When Isaac finished, Abraham nodded slowly. He said that he had been doing this a long time, that he had met a lot of runaways, some brave, some scared, some just desperate, but he had never met anyone like Isaac. He stood up, joined Scraken, and told Isaac to burn his gin. He would take them across that night when the moon was dark. Not George. Isaac asked why he would do that when he did not even know them. Abraham replied that freedom was not something obey. It was something you fight for. And anyone will not fight as hard as Isaac and Hades deserved all the help he could give. That night, under a moonless sky, Abraham's ferry carried Isaac Mercer and Hades across the Mississippi River. It was the first major crosser of their journey, the first step of Louisiana into the known territories beyond. As they reached the far shore, Hades turned to look back at his land that were left behind. Somewhere in that darkness was the plantation where she had suffered, the swamp where she had almost died, the life of Benedis that she was finally escaped. She believed that they were not free yet, that they had so far still to go. Isaac acknowledged this but pointed out that they were closer than they were yesterday, and tomorrow they would be closer still. Abraham helped them ashore and pointed north. He told them to follow the river for about 20 miles, where they would find a farm owned by a Quaker family named Handels. They should tell them Abraham sent them. The Handels would give them food and shelter and point them to the next stop on the road. Isaac recognized that Abraham was the scribe, then the grand road. Abraham smiled, not that Isaac really had read the phrase. He confirmed that the railroad was real, and that it worked. Not perfectly, not always safely, but it worked. If they followed the stations, the dog they were told, kept their heads down and their feet moving, they would make it to freedom. He had seen it happen hundreds of times. Isaac thanked him, saying he would never forget what Abraham had done for them. Abraham told him not to thank him, just make it count. Make their freedom mean something. That was thanks enough. They boarded was on their verbanek. Abraham had backed his ferry. Isaac and Hades had north into Mississippi. The road ahead was long and dangerous. There were still hundreds of miles from safety, still hunted by men who would kill them for their word. But they were no longer alone. They had allies now, people who would risk their own lives to help strangers reach freedom. And with a free step they took, they left the past a little further behind. The Handels farm sat at the end of a dirt road, hid from the main roads by a thick stand of pine trees. Isaac and Hades reached just before dawn, their bodies ached from the 20-mile walk. The farmhouse was small but well kept, with whitewashed was an era bar behind it. Smoke rose from the chimney, promise of warmth and safety. Isaac approached the front door alone, leave Hades hidden the tree. He knocked 3 times, then twice, then once, a pattern Abraham had taught him. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 50s whose hair bowed back in a sphere and kindness that seemed to see right through him. He told her that Abraham had sent the man that they needed help. The woman looked past him, scanned the darkness. She asked him any. Isaac explained the rule to himself and a woman who was sick and needed rest. The woman told him to bring her inside quickly, before the sun came up. The Handels family asked no questions. They provided food, water, clean clothes, and a blessed sleep in the road cellar, which had been converted into a headroom behind a fosse wall. It was cramped and dark, but it was safe. For the first time in over a week, Isaac and Hades subbed to that fear. They stayed with the Handels for 3 days. During that time, Isaac learned more about the Underground Railroad than he had ever known from books. The network was fast and intact, stretched from the deep south all the way to Canada. It operated through a system of codes and sequences that allow the conductors to communicate without being detected. It can delete a window that they has was safe. A kutus batteries and round a fence indicate which direction to travel. Some of the fields contain the messages about escape routes and safe houses. They handle Sazor Quakers, members of the religious society of friends. Their first told them that all people were equal in the years of code and that the referee was a cynic and humanity. They had been haliburno since the 1800s, lesser their life than their property for enslaved people to freedom. In 60 years, they had helped over 200 people escape. On this night, a walk arrived at the farm. The driver was a white man named Thomas, young and was the soft hands of someone who had never done hard labor. He was a seminary student from Ohio, spending his summer break working for the load. His job was to transport renewables from station to station, heading their loads of hay or burdens. Thomas examined that this was barely considered amazing, noting that there was room for both of them but that they would need extra head for her. The lower headed the next to about 40 miles north. From there, someone else would take them further. The journey in the walk was uncomfortable but uneventful. Thomas drove through the night, stopping only to rest the horses and check on his passengers. Isaac and Ladisla had beneath a mant of hay, breathed through caps in the stocks, listened to the sounds of the road passerby above them. The dark desert travelers on the road, farmers headed north, families traveling between towns. Once, they heard the thunder of hooves as a group of riders galloped past. Thomas tensed on his seat, ready to run if necessary, but the riders continued on with the soben. Just travelers in a hurry, nothing more. The next station was a church in a small town whose name is Enslaved. The pastor was a black man, a former slave himself, who had escaped 20 years earlier and returned to the south to help others find some freedom. He sheltered them in the church basement for 2 days, then passed them on to the next conductor. And so it continued, station to station, conductor to conductor. They made the road north through Mississippi into Tennessee. Each stop brought no faces, no stories, no reminders that they were not alone their struggle. There were establishments so rested breath and to help strangers. There were free black people who could have lived comfortably if but chose instead fit for their slave brothers and sisters. There were former slaves who had made the journey themselves and dedicated their lives to help others do the same. Isaac ran Samasar on board door these weeks of travel. He learned that the world was not divided simply into good people and bad people, into those who supported slavery and those who opposed it. The world was complicated. There were white people who owned slaves but treated them with cadence. And white people who owned no slaves but hated black people with a brown bash. There were black people who had escaped slavery and never looked back. And black people who risked free threat helped those to the chains. What mattered, if you live, was not what you were born as, but what you chose to do. Every person that along their road had made a choice. They had chosen to fight against an evil system, even that fight cost them dearly. And that choice, more than an race, the fate was a war. Addis crossed on records that traveled. The last and regular for the stood some of her fatality. She could walk longer distances now, though she still teared easily. The pain her joints had lessened, partly from the loading, but mostly from hope. For the first time in 20 years, she had some sort life for. She told Isaac more stories during their long nights of travel. She described the codes of her people, powerful spirits who controlled the forces of nature and guided the destinies of man. She explained the rituals and ceremonies that marked the passages of life, from birth to death and freeze in between. She spoke of the warriors of her village, men and women who turned from childhood to protect their community from home. She told Isaac that in her country, a young man like him would be celebrated. His intelligence, his courage, his ability to see what others missed. These were gifts from the codes. He would be trained as a leader, perhaps if as a king. Isaac replied that they were not in her country, that they were in Amalek. And Amalek, he was nothing but property. Addis corrected him firmly. She told him he was not property and never had been. Property cannot sneak, cannot dream, cannot laugh. He did all of these things. The laws of this country might call him property, but the laws of this country were wrong. And one day those laws would change. She might not live to see it, but he would. He would live to say, I don't know America was a property. And when that day came, she wanted him to remember that he was always free. In his heart, in his soul, he was always free. The chains were on his body, not on his soul. Very close into Kentucky in early October, nearly a month after their escape from Louisiana. The leaves were changed color, winter the hazels of red and cold. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the promise of winter. They were less than 100 miles from the Ohio River now. Less than 100 miles from freedom. But the closer they got to freedom, the more dangerous the journey became. Kentucky was a slave state, but a border-free territory. Slave catchers patrolled the roads that night, watching for no Australian McGiffin Cosa. The rewards for capture or haste here, where success was almost to the reach. Many Renois had come this far only to be caught within sea of the promised land. This station in Kentucky was different from the others. It was not a farm or a church, but a cave hidden in the hills that said a town called Nazareth. The conductor was a woman named Harry, a former slave who had escaped from Maryland 15 years earlier and made offer a desert tribus backside to get the desert freed. She was small and fierce, with scars on her back from the whoop and a pistol on her hip that she was not afraid to use. Harriet acknowledged that they had come a long way, that Louisiana Kentucky was no small journey. Most people did not make it half that far. Isaac explained that they had help, could people along the way. Harriet agreed that could people were the only reason if they made it. But she warned that could people could only do so much. The last stretch was the hardest. The river was watched. The catchers know all the crosser points. They would have to be smart, and they would have to be lucky. She studied Addis with a critical eye, recognizing her as the giant she had heard about. She reported that there was not $1 source of reward on Addis had. Isaac was stunned. $1,000 was more money than most people earned in a lifetime. Harriet explained that would spread fast when something unusual happened. A giant woman and a young man at smart slave catchers all the way from Louisiana was the kind of story that made the interviewers. They wanted them caught and made example of. They wanted to show the other slaves that escape was impossible. Ads pointed out that they had escaped, that they were there. Harriet made calmly and corrected her. They were not escaped yet. They would not be escaped until they were standing on free soil with no one chasing them. And late now, there were a lot of people chasing them. She was right. Over the next few days, they saw a flood of the hunt everywhere. Wanted boosters with their descriptions or narrated trees and fancy boosters. Groups of armed men patrolled the roads, stopping travelers to see their bears. Dogs were brought in from as far away as Virginia, especially turned to track the north of the Cosa Nitra. Harriet kept them hidden in the cave, ventured that only at innate gather information sublays. She had contacts through very free black people in sympathetic with so bass knows of the hunters' movements. It was a deadly game of cat and mouse, with the stakes being life and death. On their fifth night in the cave, Harriet returned with terrible news. She reported that a man was leading the search, a professional catcher named Silas Crenshaw. He had come up from Louisiana specifically to find them. Isaac felt his blood run cold. He knows that now. Crenshaw was the overseer at his Bellamy plantation. He was the one who tried to burn Addis in the swamp. Harriet explained that Crenshaw had been tracking them the whole way, following their thirst beasters. He was good at what he did. They said he had never lost a run he said his mate catcher. Addis had come very still. Her face was unreadable, but Isaac could see something burn in her eyes, something odd and deep and dangerous. She said quickly that she knew more about Crenshaw than he knew about her. When Isaac asked what she meant, she was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her face was barely above a whisper. She revealed that Silas Crenshaw and she had the same father. Is exterd atterren de sableef. Chiks bulenza kunshos fozer was blanteren vergenen en bulim kunsho. On the blanta sure she was first so after reef from Africa. He was a cruel man, filet and drank most of the time. Her after mother was an wake for reef. Addis was born in Enslaved. Isaac understood the implications. Silas was half a brother. They shared the same blood. He was the son of the master, raised in the big house with Finko's and Nijikash. She was the daughter of Asaph, raised in the quarters with Anubis. Some father, different fate. Isaac asked Scrunchono, if we know she was his sister. Addis laughed bitterly. He had always known. When they were children, before she was so dull, they lived on the same bench. They saw each other every day. He knew who she was. He knew what his father had done to her mother. And he hated her for it. He hated her because her existence was a proof of his father's sin. He hated her because every time he looked at her, he saw the truth about his family. Isaac asked if that was why Crenshaw tried to kill her in the song. Addis confirmed that he had been trying to kill her for 20 years. Every time she was sold, every time she was moved to a no plantation, he found a way to follow. He would appear as an overseer or a head hand, always watching, always waiting. He told her once that he would not rest until she was dead, until there was no evidence left of what his father had done. Isaac understood now why Crenshaw had been so eager to burn Addis in the song. It was not just about money or property. It was personal. It was about the wrath of a shameful truth, about destroying the remainder of his father's crimes. Isaac insisted that they had to cause that night, before Crenshaw found them. Harriet shook her head. The river crossers were all watched. Crenshaw had managed a free point between her and Cincinnati. There would be walker into a trap. Isaac replied that there would find another way. There had been another way. The plan through the night. Harriet knows the territory better than anyone. Every bus and stream and header blast was 50 miles. She drew maps in the dirt, explaining the options and the risks. There was only one road that might work, a dangerous bus through the backcountry that would bring them to the river at an anchored point. Harriet warned them that it was after. Hills and hollows, dense forests, not raised follow. It would take 3 days to cover what would normally be a one-day journey. And if the hunters breaked their trail, there would be nowhere to hide. Isaac insisted that the hunters would not pick up their trail. They had made this far. They would make it the rest of the way. They set out at midnight, leaving the cave behind and headed into the wilderness. Harry guided them for the first few miles, showing them landmarks and cave instructions. Then she embraced them both and disappeared back into the darkness, with a barrier that code would speed them and that she would see them on the other side. The next 3 days were the hardest of the entire journey. The terrain was exactly as brutal as Harriet had warned. They came steep hills and descended into shadowy hollows. They rode through streams and crawled through thickets of thorns. They slept in the open, huddled together for warmth as the October nights grew colder. Addis record was a free stab. The rough ground was acne on her damaged joints. Several times she fell, unable to catch herself, and Isaac had to help her back to her feet. But she never complained. She never asked it to stop. She kept moving forward, one painful step at a time, driven by a determination that went beyond mere survival. On the second night, there were dogs in the distance. The burn of hands on a scent. The scent that had haunted their journey from the very beginning. Crenshaw had found their trail. Isaac cooked their berries, bushed them harder than he had ever bushed before. They abandoned their bland route and headed straight for the river, no longer caring about this or coach. Speed was all that mattered now. Speed and luck and the stubborn refusal to give up. They reached the Ohio River on the morning of the Sunday. It stretched before them like a sulphur rib, perhaps a quarter-mile wide, flowing quickly in the relay. On the far shore was Ohio. Free soil. Thirsty. But between them and freedom stood Silas Crenshaw. He emerged from the tree lane was a dozen at his back. There were round those rifles and pistols, their faces bulbous. The dogs round at their leashes, broke frantically at the seat zerber. Crenshaw himself was a tall man, lean and withered, with a belly that had no mercy. He walked toward them slowly, suffer as a moment, a smell blew on his nubs. He announced that it was the end of the road, acknowledging that they had come a could chase, better than most. But it was over now. Isaac stood in front of others, as if his body could somehow shield her from what was coming. He urged Crenshaw let them go, pointing at that they were almost free. Just let them walk across that river. Crenshaw laughed. He asked if Isaac knew how much money he had spent tracking them, how many miles he had traveled. He declared that he had been chasing her for 20 years. He was not about let her go when he was this close to finishing. Isaac told Crenshaw that she was his sister. His own blood. The smile vanished from Crenshaw's face. He demanded to know who told Isaac that. Isaac replied that others had told him freely, about Crenshaw's father, about what he did, about why Crenshaw had been hunting her all these years. Crenshaw's face twisted with rage. He denied that she was his sister, calling her enemy, a sin. His father's shamad flesh. He declared that he was going to arrest that sham once and for all. He raised his rifle and aimed it at Ed's chest. What happened next would be remembered as radio for generations. Some called it a miracle. Others called it madness. But everyone who witnessed it agreed on one thing, they had never seen anything like it. At this move. Not slowly, not painfully, not like a sick woman who could barely walk. She moved like the warrior she had been born to be, like the daughter of chiefs and priestesses, like a force of nature that could not be stopped by mortal man. She grabbed Isaac and threw him toward the river. He said through the river and landed in the shallow water near the shore, to shoot thief cry. Then she turned to face the man who had come to kill her. Crenshaw fired his rifle. The bullet struck her on the shoulder, spun her half around, but she did not fall. She lunged forward and grabbed the rifle from his hands, snapped it into like a great hook. One of the other men fired. Another bullet struck her on the side. Still, she did not fall. She fought like a dame, like the Fanged Angel, like some sort of those stories, the legends of warriors who could not be killed by ordinary weapons. Man went up before her like wet before a seas. Bones broke. Blood flowed. Screams filled the air. Isaac was from the water, froze with horror now. He wanted help, wanted to do something, but he could not move. All I could do was watch as they fought her fine battle. It lasted less than 5 minutes. When it was over, 12 men around the river banner. None of the modern river Isaac. 3 were crawled away into the trees, to broken talk. Like it be life. Silas Crenshaw was one of the survivors. He lay on his back with both legs shattered, staring up at his woman who had destroyed his man with her bare hands. Blood ran down his face from a gash from his fall. His belly lay sore with stir. Ed stood over him, breathing hard, her body riddled with wounds that should have killed her. That sucked her clothes and up onto the ground. She looked like this self-camped claim what was odd. She told him that he had hunted her for 20 years. He tried to destroy her because she reminded him of what his father was, but he could not destroy truth. He could not arrest him because in innocent. His father's son was written in his own blood. Every time he looked in a mirror, he would see it. Every time he closed his eyes, he would remember this mom. That was her gift to him. That was her revenge. She raised her foot to crush his skull. Then she stopped. Slowly, she lowered her foot and stepped back. She told him that she would not kill him. He was not to resist on her soul. He would live with what he was. He would live with what he had done. And every day for the rest of his miserable life, he would know that she could have ended him. And she chose mercy instead. She turned away from him and walked toward the river. Each step was slower than the last. The light was fading from her eyes, but she kept walking, kept moving toward the water, toward freedom, toward Isaac. She reached the shore and collapsed. Isaac caught her as she fell, though her weight drove him to his knees. He held her there in the shallow water, her blood mixed with the current that flowed toward Ohio. She was able for him to go, some. It was not far. He could make it. Isaac refused to leave without her. She smiled, and despite the freeze, it was the most beautiful scene Isaac had ever seen. She told him that he had already suffered. That night in the swamp, he had suffered so. He gave her hope when she had enough. He gave her a raised life. Because of him, she died free. Because of him, she died young. Isaac insisted that she was no going to die, that they were going to cross together, that they were going to make it. She told him that she was already across. She was already home. She reached up into his face with a bloody hand. She asked him to remember her, to tell her story, to tell them about Hades of Nukur, daughter of chiefs, sister of warriors. To tell them she fought. To tell them she never sought fatal, not until the farine. Her eyes closed. Her breath slowed. And there, in the waters of the Ohio River, just yelled from free soil, Hades died in the arms of the man who had served her. Isaac held her for a long time. He wept until he had no tears left. He screamed at his skin till his face was calm. He begged, buried the spirits of Hades' ancestors, begged anyone who might be listener to bring her back. But this does not work. This does not negotiate. When this comes, there is no Orchion who sits verdict. Finally, Isaac did the only thing he could do. He started summoned. The river was cold and the current was strong. But Isaac was desperate. He fought against the water with the freezing he had, driven by a fury that would not let him stop. Behind him, on the Kentucky shore, Silas Crenshaw broken among the bodies of his men. Before him, crowned closer with the free stroke, was Ohio. He reached the foreshore just as the sun was setting. He dragged himself onto the bank alley there, gasping, too exhausted to move. He had made it. He was on free soil. He was safe. But he did not feel free. He did not feel safe. He felt empty, hollow, like something essential had been torn from him left behind on the other side of the river. He walked north through the darkness, following the road that Harriet had described. Sometime around midnight, he reached a farmhouse with a candle burning in the window. He knocked on the door and collapsed into the arms of the strangers one side. They were conductors on the Underground Railroad. They had been expecting him. War traveled fast along the network, and they knew about the G2 men the young man who were trained to cross into Ohio. They took him in, fed him, gave him clean clothes and a warm bed. But when they asked about Hades, Isaac could not answer. He could not find the words to describe what had happened on the riverbank. All he could do was shake his head and weep. He stayed with the family for 2 weeks, recovering his strength. They asked no questions about his past and made no demands about his future. When he was ready to leave, they gave him money, supplies, and directions to the next station on the road Canada. But Isaac did not go to Canada. He had a different destination in mind. He made his way to Cincinnati, the largest city in Ohio, where there was a community of free black people and skipped thefts. He found work as a laborer in a warehouse, free benjeren. He found teachers who would help him continue his education, learn trade and let at a level far beyond what he had taught himself. He found abolitionists who were feared in slavery, and he joined their cause with all the bash in his young heart. Years passed. Isaac grew from a young man into a full adult. He was as an restored self-able to offer the costs of slavery, as politicians are killed and compromise and felt solve the fundamental injustice at the heart of America's city. He watched as war finally came, as the Union and the Confederacy clashed in battles that killed more Americans than all previous wars combined. In 1863 وانبرزت إبراهيم لينكولن شد منصب باش proclamation la black men to serve in the Union Army, Isaac enlisted. He was 21 years old, tall and strong, hoorde the years of liberals. He joined the 54 Massachusetts, one of the first black regiments in the United States military. The 54 Massachusetts was formed in March of 1863, just 2 months after Lincoln's proclamation took effect. The regiment was led by white officers, as was required by law, but its soldiers were all black men. Some were freeborn Northerners. Others were escaped slaves from the South. All of them were fighting for something larger than themselves, the destruction of slavery and the promise of a new America. Isaac turned at the camp meek with said boast, learned march and shot and fit as both of a young. He discovered that he had a natural talent for soldiering. His years of insensibility had taught him patience and observation. His time on the underground railroad had taught him endurance and courage. His memory of others had taught him that some sinners are worse therefore. The 54 Massachusetts sought first major action جلي 1863 at the Battle of Fort Wagner. Fort Wagner was a Confederate stronghold more sailed, South Carolina, corridor zero approached the Charles Harbor. The Union command decided that taking the fort would be a crucial step toward capture of Charles itself, the birthplace of secession and the symbolic heart of the Confederacy. This assault was a disaster. The 54 led the charge because 600 yards of occupation there was a fear from the Confederate defenders. Men fell by the dozens, by the scores, by the hundreds. The regiment lost nearly half its strength in less than an hour, including its commander officer, Colonel Robert Coleshaw, who was killed leader his men over the fort's walls. Isaac was among those who made it to the walls. He climbed over the parapet and fought hand-to-hand with Confederate soldiers in the Daltons. He killed men and watched as runs dead beside him. He was wounded twice, once in the arm and once in the leg, but he kept fighting until the order came to retreat. The Union forces failed to take Fort Wagner that night, but the courage of the 54 Massachusetts changed the course of the war. Their sacrifice proved that black soldiers could fight as bravely as white soldiers, that they were willing to die for their country and their freedom. In the months that followed, nearly 200,000 black men enlisted the Union Army. Many of them cited the example of the 54 as a celebration. Isaac recovered from his own dissolved duty. He fought in skirmishes and sieges across the South. He saw friends dead beside him and enemies fall before him. He learned what it meant to fight for something larger than himself, something worse therefore. And through it all, he never forgot others. He carried her memory with him like a talisman, a reminder of what courage really meant. When fear threatened to overwhelm him, he remembered her stand on the river bank, though a dozen old men was nestled at her bare hands. When despair crept into the dark stairs, he remembered her smile as she lay down, at a base with herself and the world. The war ended in April of 1865 with the surrender of the Confederate Army at Appomattox Courthouse. Slavery was over. The chains were broken. Formerly people who had been poverty were now free, at least under the law. Isaac was 23 years old. He had survived the war, survived the impossible journey from Louisiana to Ohio, survived the fleas that life had thrown at him. And he had one final task complete. He went back to Kentucky. Silas Crenshaw had survived the battle on the river bank, but he had never recovered. His legs had been shattered beyond repair. He spent the rest of the war in a wheelchair, bitter and broke, watching as the world he had known collapsed around him. The vantage he had hoped to inherit was destroyed by Union troops. The fortune he had counted on fabricated in the chaos of defeat. By 1865, he was left errand on board Hassan fell, a shell of the man he had once been. Isaac found him there, sitting on the porch in his wheelchair, staring at the sun. The blaze that had once burned was shattered or nadal and empty. The limp body that had once radiated menace was now wasted and weak. Isaac stood before him in his Union uniform, a soldier of the victorious army, a freeman and a nurse that had finally chosen freedom. He asked Crenshaw remembered him. Crenshaw looked up slowly. Recognition flickered in his eyes, then fear. He identified Isaac as his reader slave. Isaac corrected him. His name was Isaac Mercer. Hij was zeller Crenshaw treed Bernardes. Hij was zeller Shibo Crenshaw's like the neft hem leef. En hij was zeller net finish wat she stolte. Crenshaw's hands trembled down the runs of his witcherer. He looked around for help, but there was no one. The border house was empty. The streets were quiet. They were alone. Isaac reached into his coat and put at a base of the bear. It was old and worn, folded many times over many years. He unfolded it carefully and held it up for Crenshaw to see. It was the wanted poster from 1959. The one with the rough stitches of a gilt woman and a man. The one that had offered $1 saucer for their capture. Isaac let the poster fall into Crenshaw's lap. The broken man stared at it, his face pale as death. Isaac stood there for a long moment, looking down at the man who had haunted his nightmares for 6 years. He had imagined this moment a thousand times. He had dreamed of revenge, of justice, of Michael Crenshaw before a freeze he had done. He had carried a pistol all the way from Cincinnati, loaded Nadi, waiting for this confrontation. But Sander Zeller, looking at the broken creature in the wheelchair, Isaac felt something unexpected. He felt duty. Crenshaw had spent his entire life running from the truth about his father, about himself, about the evil he had chosen to embrace. And in the end, that run had led him nowhere. He was alone, crippled, despised, forgotten. He had lost a friend really for valued, and he would spend whatever years meant to tap that book about the vastness of both his memories and his shame. Isaac realized that killer Crenshaw would be a mercy. It would end his suffering. It would release him from the breath of his own icon. And Addis had not chose mercy for that reason. She had chose mercy because Crenshaw was not worth the cost of vengeance. Isaac put the pistol away. He told Crenshaw that Addis had spared his life on that riverbank. She could have killed him, but she chose not to. She said he was not worth the stone on her soul. For 6 years, Isaac had wondered if she made the right choice. Now he knows that she had. He told Crenshaw that he was no going to kill him either, but he wanted Crenshaw to know something. He wanted him to know that Addis won. She did free. She did on her own terms. And her story would be remembered long after Crenshaw was forgotten. People would tell their children about the giant woman who fought her with freedom. Nobody would tell their children about Silas Crenshaw. Isaac turned and walked away. Behind him, Crenshaw sat in Silas, the wanted poster still catching his trembling hands. That was the last time Isaac ever saw Silas Crenshaw. The former overseer did 3 years later, learn that some border has, of causes that no one bothered to record. His grave was unmarked, his name forgot, his legacy of the death. Isaac Mercer lived for another 50 years. He became a teacher, then a principal, then a leader in his community. He married a woman Enslaved, a former slave from Virginia, and they had 4 children together. He told his children about Addis, and they told their children, and those children told their children after them. This story passed through generations, changed a little with each teller, but always keep the essential truth at its heart. In his 10 years, Isaac wrote down the story of his escape with Addis. He wanted to make sure it would survive after he was gone, that future generations would know what she had sacrificed and what she had achieved. He titled the manuscript The Giant of Nukor, a token of courage and freedom. The manuscript was lost for many years, passed through the hands of collectors and historians who did not recognize its significance. It was rediscovered in 1947 post-Atlantic of a house in Cincinnati that had once been a stop on the Underground Railroad. Historians verified its authenticity and published it for the first time in 1952, nearly a century after the events it described. The story of Isaac Mercer and Addis became part of the larger story of American resistance to slavery. It was taught in schools and taught in churches. It was cited by civil rights leaders as an example of courage in the face of impossible odds. It reminded people that freedom was never enough. It had to be fought for, suffered for, and sometimes died for. Isaac died in 1909 at the age of 67. He was buried in a cemetery in Cincinnati beside his wife Sarah, og had basto eto irzerier. Hestom stombor symbolins herbeshizat he had shows himself. It read, he stood up. Those reorers captured the frees that mattered but Isaac Mercer's life. He was born into slavery with no rights, no freedom, and no future. But when he saw injustice, he did not look up. When he saw suffering, he did not turn his back. When he saw a woman being led to her death, he stood up. That choice, made in a moment of impossible courage, changed the freeze. It served a life. It preserved a story. It proved that the human spirit could not be chained, no matter what laws or customs or cruelties tried to bend it. Adesna verricht the free soul for hell. Her body lay somewhere on the Kentucky shore of the river, in a motorcraft that has long since been forgot. But her spirit crossed that river as a sentence of her. Carried in the hearts of a free one who heard her story and was inspired by her sacrifice. She was Ades of Nokor, daughter of chiefs, sister of warriors. She was stolen from her home, stripped of her humanity, and subjected to horrors that nobles should ever endure. But she never stopped fighting. She never stopped hoping. And in the end, she proved that freedom is not a bliss you reach. It is a choice you make. Isaac Mercer understood that less better than anyone. He carried it with him for the rest of his life, and he passed it on to everyone he met. He taught his students that they were not defined by their circumstances but by their choices. He taught his children that courage was not the absence of fear but the decision to dissipate fear. He taught everyone who would listen that impossible sinners become possible when ordinary people refuse to accept injustice. The world that Isaac and Ades were born into no longer exists. Slavery is abolished. The laws that once defined human beings as property have been swept away. But the struggle for freedom continues, in no forms and no blesses, against no enemies and no hatred. The story of the giant woman's readers remains us where we come from. It reminds us what our ancestors endured and what they achieved. It reminds us that progress is not inevitable, that freedom must be defended in a freedom rush. And it reminds us that sometimes, when all seems lost, when the darkness closes and hope fades away, someone stands up. Someone refuses to accept the unacceptable. Someone chooses to fight, even when fate seems futile. That is the legacy of Isaac Mercer and Ades of Nokor. That is the lesson they left for all of us. They stood up.